Thanks for tuning in to Jin and Tantra. In this episode, we discuss not following God's rules, the battle of your internal instincts against your own willpower, the difference between natural and moral evil, religious structures and spiritual practice, free will, and the energy of activation. Enjoy the episode.
Hey, fellow GNTers, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. We are back in the midst of our series of episodes on suffering, dukkha. We kind of like discovered as we were doing this podcast that we kind of end up doing these things in groups. So sometimes we have a whole series of episodes on a certain issue or a certain set of issues, like a certain theme, and we're in the middle of the dukkha episodes because we're really kind of, if part of our home base is to do Buddhist Tantra, then this is part of talking about Buddhist Tantra for sure, but it's kind of like a big question anyway. So we decided to do a big picture view on it, and we talked about different traditions and how they think about this. It occurred to me, Daniel, is that there was something really interesting about this. I wasn't thinking about it when we were prepping it, but there is this like a Buddhist thing that they would do where they would kind of just describe other people's ways of looking at the world. And I have some of those texts at home. They kind of even go back to India, all the way back to these big Buddhist centers that they had north of India, where they would just go like, okay, here's what Brahmins think, and these are what the followers of Shiva think, and this is what this philosophical school in India thinks. So they just kind of like lay out this whole set of ideas. They're describing the view of whatever group of people it is. And I thought, that's actually kind of what we're trying to do here, because
like the original version of like a gathering of Whoopi Goldberg, Meghan McCain, Barbara Walters, and
there you go, the view. Yeah,
right,
they all have different views. Yeah. That's right. It's so close to that.
Almost identical. I
really feel like, that show might have been inspired. Someone in Hollywood was like, or not, perhaps not. But anyways, you go through and you describe all this stuff, and then you walk away with an idea of like, okay, what do Christians think? And you try to like do an honest presentation of that, non-judgy, hopefully, right?
Hopefully, yeah.
And then in the end, you kind of go like, okay, well, this is where you might have points of agreement or disagreement or whatever, So it is like we are tapping into a longer Buddhist tradition of doing this, right? I thought, well, okay, that's cool. That's ultimately what we're trying to do for people. And then, people can listen and you can go, oh, yeah, maybe I do have some of those thoughts in my head too, especially I think in Western culture, because we're raised in kind of a Christian culture anyways.
Right.
So even if you're not Christian, you kind of sort of are, just culturally.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really kind of true. But we can debate that in future episodes. That's a planned episode where we get to debate that question.
Are you Christian? Yes, no, or you cannot say no.
Well, it's kind of like in my mind, part of the neoliberalism and you series, where we'll have to do a couple episodes on that, because it's like this is the water that you're swimming in, whether you think about it that way or not. It's kind of like how it is. So anyways, so we did the Christianity thing. We're going to do the rest of the big three. They're kind of similar, right, in terms of where they think things come from, but we'll kind of try to give them each a fair shake.
Right.
I did do a little research on the Joel Osteen prosperity gospel thing, which I don't know if we'll ever do anything on that, more so than it'll just pop up occasionally. It's just rear its head. What was interesting is I there's a lot of Christians who don't like it too.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot of crap from multiple directions. So, I thought, oh, that's interesting. I was listening to some Christian podcasty people who were like, they were trashing Joel Osteen much worse than we would. And you didn't go mild on your criticisms. Like, you went for it, right? It's fair. But I stumbled across this story, which I had no idea about. So this is just news of the world, somewhat dated. But I don't know if you've ever heard this, but like apparently back in like 2012, maybe, if I'm getting the dates right, $600,000 went missing from their safe in his mega church in Houston. 2021, if I have the dates right, a plumber was doing some work on a toilet in one of the facilities, and there were $600,000 in envelopes like in the wall.
Wow.
Behind the toilet in Joel Osteen's church. And the question, I don't think, from what I didn't like past a certain point, didn't research it, but I don't think there was ever like a satisfactory explanation given as to exactly what happened there. It was initially reported as a robbery from the safe. So I don't know what kind of robber would be motivated to steal $600,000 and then like embed it in the wall behind the toilet, where he
neatly,
stole it from.
neatly take down the drywall, and probable tile behind the toilet, and then put back up said drywall and tile.
I don't know what the story means, but I was just like, okay, that's interesting. That makes a person wonder.
It does.
I guess if you're ever robbed, that means you should just like investigate behind your own toilet. See, Jin and Tantra giving you helpful advice for your life.
You're
Look
welcome.
there first.
You're welcome.
Might be the Joel Osteen thief. Just rip out the toilet. Maybe all the stuff that was stolen falls out again. You find your iPhone and some other shit.
Literally.
I know, interesting story. So I thought I would share it.
Yeah.
With you and our G&T audience. I don't know a lot about Joel Osteen, but there it is.
That's
the other thing I discovered is they have like a little Joel Osteen cube where you can like buy it and then you can just get his voice telling you inspirational things for the morning. It just comes out. Or it's like you could do whole sermons. It comes out of this little box. So you don't have to go to church.
Yeah, why would you need to? Just send money.
Skip it.
Every month,
Joel Osteen boxed,
or every week. Yeah. Just send your money in, your tithes, and
tithing is a deep tradition. Yeah, tithing.
Yeah, you don't need to go. Just that's all they really want, anyways.
No, I was like, okay, that's interesting. I didn't know those things, but the toilet story was like, thought provoking. All right.
As human beings, we are uniquely subject to the magnetic pull of cultism.
I think this will come up even later, like the teaching I had from the Dalai Lama in Washington, D.C. I talked about before on this. I promised I was going to do it to the monk in Namgal and up in New York. And so I did it. I went. And there is this thing of human beings, like we can generate a lot of knowledge.
Yeah.
But we also have a way of getting hypnotized by our own ideas. Yeah. It's one of the flaws of being a human being specifically. We like our own ideas. We like our own Kool-Aid. Yep. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah. All right. Well, that's my end of the Christianity thing. Unless you had something else to say on it,
I'm over.
Probably come back up again. The only thing I think maybe we didn't do fairly last week, we did talk about the idea of like, why is there suffering in Christianity? What's the explanations? And we did do it. We said you're not connected enough to God or Christ as a connection to God. Or an aspect of God, or whatever you want to say about that. Complicated question. Because you're not following the instructions. This is all going to repeat with the other big three, obviously, right? That suffering is part of just the mystery of creation, and there's a higher intelligence working behind it, and so you may suffer in this life, but in the next life you'll be rewarded. Right. Okay. And there's a plan somehow. There are other explanations depending on like the Christian perspective, and it's the same in Islam, I think, in Judaism, where you could see it as a test.
Sure. Right.
Which gets you to like the famous Abraham story of Abraham and Isaac, the binding of Isaac, where Abraham is instructed by an angel to do a sacrifice, and the sacrifice is going to be Isaac. People don't know the story, So Abraham does actually bind his son down as you're going to execute him as the sacrifice, which is a kind of a weird story on so many levels. But also, like, if you really kind of know that story, like Abraham was longing for a son like forever. That's part of the whole story. So he's going to give up his son is the thing he really like was most longing for in his whole life. And at the last minute, the angel appears and says, hey, don't touch a hair on that child's head. And then a ram appears, or a sheep or something, in the thicket nearby, and then they sacrifice the animal. So you're like, okay, complicated story, but there is something like there's a test going on there, and it goes back to that. And we're going to be talking about Judaism and Islam, and obviously, so that story has to come up. And did you think about that story ever, or no?
No, not unless it comes up. I'm not like rolling around the world going like, man, that Abraham.
Yeah, that's a hell of a story. I should think about that more in my daily life.
Yeah, exactly.
Heading over to the Whole Foods. No, we might not think about that too much.
Probably not.
But it's a deep story. Right?
Yeah.
I can't remember. Carl Jung, this famous psychiatrist, has some stuff on that. Maybe when we do Jung, we'll talk about that because he's interested in these Christian stories. In any case, I don't know. Does Joseph Campbell talk about it? Because
I don't know. He has a lot of works. I haven't read them all.
Yeah. I wonder what he would say about that. Maybe I'll do a little research for next show. All right. And then the other part of it is like, it could be a lesson to be learned. Yeah, like we didn't specifically say that. Maybe we should. Because as I was doing my little research, at least to try to present things on Islam, which I like, again, full acknowledgement in the beginning, this is what I probably know the least about of the big three that we're going to be talking about. I know if you have feelings about it too, so I'm curious to see if you have thoughts on it. But obviously in Islam, you would say, okay, sometimes it's a test, right? Which is the Abrahamic story, right? And why Abraham is so important, like in the Islamic tradition too, founder of the, this whole tree. And then sometimes it's like a lesson or something, right?
Right.
So I guess we'll do those things as we get to that. But anyway, so that's it. I thought that maybe we probably should do some justice, at least mention those other ways of thinking about it.
Yeah.
And probably like your average like follower of the big three probably thinks different ways at different times about that, right? I mean, I try to go back to my Catholic roots. What did I think? How good of a Catholic was I? I don't know. But when I thought about that, what did I think? Did I sometimes, and that just would have been when I would have been like a boy into my early teens or something like that. I probably thought different things about this at times, like sometimes I would think, okay, maybe I'm supposed to learn something from this. Maybe it's supposed to be some kind of a test or something. I probably had those kinds of thoughts. Do you remember them at all?
I don't remember them. I remember, no, I don't remember that. Because I didn't ask those kinds of questions, at least regularly when I was a kid. I just remember though, hearing it's not in accordance with God's will, And so, and I don't know where that fits along with God's rules or learning a lesson, but like, to me,
God's plan or something.
Yeah. Something like this plan. But I just, that word has always stuck with me, God's will.
The will,
like in Arabic, even in Christian Arabic tradition and in the Muslim Arabic, tradition, there's a word that says inshallah or inshallah, right? God willing. So if you say, if I was to say, hey, Eric, let's get together this weekend. Saturday sounds good. You'd say, yeah, that sounds good. God willing.
Yeah.
And not Christian.
You're saying Allah, right? You're saying Allah.
Yeah, inshallah,
Gotcha.
God's will, right?
Yeah.
So inshallah is how it would pronounce together. But so it's like this kind of idea of like God's will, as if it's like maybe it's a path or maybe it's, but there's an intentionality that sort of, I don't know, is implied by that word. And then if it doesn't happen, it's because it's not in God's will.
Yeah.
And if you're not in accordance with God's will, then the consequences would seemingly be logical at that point, because you're not in accordance with that. But how would one know God's will? I don't know. I guess the rules that were laid out, but like, are there other?
You're even talking about something different, because there's no real rule, I guess, about us getting together on Saturday or not getting together on Saturday, right? That's more of just like an event, right?
Correct. But if there was if we weren't supposed to get together, or there was something else that was supposed to happen, then that would not be against God's will, and neither one of us knows his will. Therefore, if it didn't happen, it was against we're just making we're playing a logical game.
It's kind of like sometimes what the Dalai Lama will say, like the way Tibetans will talk about karma. They'll just go, oh, it was the karma that was either in favor or not in favor of that thing, which is a little bit more arbitrary in the sense of like, it wasn't like we were doing something that like was covered by the rules or something like that. Right. I can't remember if I thought that way as a kid, like you have those little explorations. We try to be autobiographical on the podcast. And the one thing I can remember for sure, my parents got me this waterbed. It was just like a bladder, like just one of those plain water beds. It's just like a big, like, rubber bag. When I was like getting to the point where I was going to be losing my virginity, that was a hell of a thing to try to have sex on. You just be like sloshing everywhere.
Sweet.
Or if you're really drunk, it could be a problem on the waterbed. Stumble back home, drunk teenager, waterbed is a problem. Waving and waving.
Call that a vomit comet.
Yeah. So I had like, it had this headboard on it. And I remember at some point we had this huge family Bible, big red family Bible. I think probably my parents got it as a wedding gift or something, like the old school wedding gift that you would do that. And my parents both wound up atheists, so no one was using the Bible. So I remember taking it. Then I grew up with my grandparents too, and they were the ones who took me to church all the time. And I can remember reading the Sermon on the Mount, and being like, oh yeah, this speaks to me. blessed are the sick, they shall be healed. Blessed are the
Mm-hmm.
downtrodden in spirit, they'll be comforted. I thought, this is pretty great.
Mm-hmm.
So you have those moments. And I must have thought about some of these questions. I'm pretty sure I did. Because I like had some belief in something beyond the material world, which translate later on into Buddhism or something. But that's my recollection of those kinds of things. Did you read the Quran at all when you were young?
No, because I wasn't introduced.
It's a complicated thing. It was partially Catholic, partially
Muslim,
right?
I wasn't introduced to Islam until probably I was about maybe 14. And before that, I had some of my family that was, sort of Eastern Orthodox or Catholic, really, for all intents and purposes. And then sort of my mom, who left that and was searching, and so would take us to various temples and things like this. So on Sunday mornings, we would read like Aesop's Fables. That would be our Bible study,
So the story of like a fox who needs to try to get the grapes out of the tree or something like that.
Yeah. That was that, and she followed all different kinds. So I was aware of different like Indian gurus and things like this from a very young age. Like it was like, I remember one was Sai Baba or something.
Oh, Sai Baba. I think he might be the dude that Pete Townsend followed from the Who.
Might be. I mean, he was super.
I might have heard of him. Yeah, for a while. Very musical, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was introduced.
There's a Who song called Baba O'Reilly.
Oh, well.
Yeah. That's like, I don't know. You have to know the Who to know what this even is. Teenage Wasteland. Oh, yeah. Anyways, that's the line from the song. If you don't know the Who, you'd be like, what is this guy talking about? But anyways.
I think that's
Baba O'Reilly. Yeah, it's Baba O'Reilly.
Yeah.
And like, the backstory, this is like total G&T randomness, but the backstory of the synth line on that is I think he put in like astrological data for like this Baba, Sai Baba, and like it just produced that little melody in the background.
Wow.
And he used it as the backing of the track.
Wow.
A little musical trivia for y'all.
Man, there you go.
But I remember I liked the Who a little bit when I was a kid. And I remember I like that song. I think it's a great track. And I just heard that thing about that track, and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting, that the dude would do that. So he considered him to be his guru. So he tried to he had a whole idea that you would just put in people's information and it would produce melodies. And so he just did that for that, and that little synth track, I guess, popped up, and whatever the computer did it. That's a cool story.
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to be able to be introduced to things like this when I was younger. So I was just sort of like absorbing. I wasn't really.
Yeah, your mom was spiritually searching, obviously, right?
Yeah.
And we had the great episodes with her talking about her Sufi experiences. So
yeah. Well, that's part of the whole point with all this is to get people to be, who are either searching or actively in a search, right? To be able to kind of find those pieces, the pieces that stick.
Well, I think in our G&T psychology, then you were kind of like introduced to this whole idea of being a spiritual seeker when you were a kid.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky.
Parts of that go forward.
Yeah. No, and I'm unlucky because of that. I feel lucky because of that.
I mean, there's two ways you can talk about that kind of thing. You can say, well, okay, that's psychological because you were raised in an environment where people were doing that. But you can also say that's karmic, right? If you want to be more Buddhist about it, in the sense that, you needed to be a spiritual seeker in your life, and you had a mom who had that quality in her. Right? So you want to be more like Buddhist Tantra about it. Yeah. All right. Very cool. All right. So Islam, I guess, right? We'll try to talk about it and see if we have to say. And obviously, I think I'll turn to you to the extent that you might know more about this than me. But actually, we'll see what you feel about this stuff. All right. So yeah, again, full disclosure, this is the tradition that I am least versed in. My interest in this really came through being interested in these great Persian poets, people like Rumi and Hafez. Those are the people I really like. I love their poetry. I think it's awesome. I think it's fair to say those are some of the best poets ever created on this planet.
I think many would agree.
Anywhere. It's the most beautiful poetry you got. And so I'm like, okay, they really speak through the power of their poetry and just the power of their ideas, the power of their emotions. I mean, it's beautiful stuff. So I like that. And, so it leads me to want to understand more about this. So I don't know, but it is an area where it's not like the thing I know as much about. So I'll lay out what I got in terms of the research, and you can kind of give your impressions and like corrections as it goes, or whatever you feel like you need to say about it. So the thing that came up was this idea of like natural evil versus moral evil. It did come up a little bit, and we haven't talked about that thing. Just that there can be suffering caused from, natural disasters and things like that. what you sometimes call acts of God in English, right?
Mm-hmm.
Things that just happen because they happen, like there's a tsunami or something, or an earthquake, and stuff just happens. So these are natural sufferings. I think from the Buddhist stuff we were talking about before, birth, aging, sickness, death, those are just natural sufferings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like part of like nature itself. If you go farther, then they talk about this idea of what they call moral evil. And moral evil is human beings causing suffering for themselves or for others. And those things in theory would be preventable if people would behave differently. So I guess that's a framework we hadn't talked about too much, but it did come up here. So I thought I should like put it out there. That seems useful on some level if you're going to talk about human suffering, to make a distinction between these two. And I think you have it in the Buddhist thing, even though they don't make it like super clear. It's kind of there, like hovering around, right?
Yeah, I think the difficult part is then when you put a society in on top of that,
Yeah.
and there's like the systems that are in place that are more favorable to some and less favorable to others. Which one is that? Is that natural? Because that's man-made, but it's not like that system is out to get you in particular. But but the weaknesses of the creation of the system, perhaps inadvertently, we hope, target some more than others. Therefore, it seems man-made.
Well, how do you talk about it? Like, it's not like it's not particularly out to get you, because you're part of either a particular group that it's out to get,
right?
Or maybe it's just out to get everybody in certain ways.
You never know,
right? Because you're part of everybody. You're going to get got.
Yeah.
And if you're part of a subgroup that specifically is being targeted, then you're going to get got even more so.
Yeah.
It's so, okay. I haven't gone to Society Sucks rant in a while, and I'm going to save it. We talk about Taoism, but I'm glad you brought it up, because I feel satisfied, like vicariously.
Yeah.
From your doing that,
Well,
I feel voyeuristically satisfied watching you do that.
I had a client who went to Scotland for a couple of weeks, and she just came back, and she was there for maybe 3 weeks. And she just was mentioning on how, like, in Scotland in particular, but in France as well, and some other European countries that she's been to recently, that like they make a seemingly good effort into integrating small business and big business. And small business, like, they have to have a percentage of their food that comes from locally grown farms. And they have big business, but they also have a ton of small businesses and things like this. And that the growth of one doesn't have to mean the stamping out of another one. And she's like, they have it right. She's like, don't get me wrong. Capitalism has been the greatest driver to lift as many people up and out of poverty as possible across the world. So she's like, I'm not poo-pooing on that. However, in its raw, unadulterated form, how we have it, kind of, it's perverted, because in order for some to have, others cannot. They just work together. And then, like I talk about some of the systems that are implemented, people who can will, skirt out the rules, and those who cannot are bound to them, and they can be oppressive because especially if you're trying to compete, you can't compete with those who have, some ability to get away from the rules, like paying taxes, Amazon, for one example, or move your money offshore, which numerous corporations have done. So a mom and pop doesn't compete, in this case. And so then we're looking, when we tie it back into our conversation around suffering, somebody might have had their business and their livelihood, as something, and then, pandemic happens, or there's some economic shift. Well, what is that? God's will? Is that a natural evil? Is that a man-made evil? I mean, it seems to sort of run the gamut between all of them, really.
Well, first of all, Daniel, obviously what you're talking about is heretical, because the free market has to work by its own devices.
Oh, sorry.
Please.
Laissez-faire.
We haven't done our neoliberalism in you episode. It's coming. And, yes. So we'll get there. Yeah. But also I think, okay, so on the natural evil, moral evil, there's no doubt that they say that, like, moral actions of human beings can make natural things, like, much worse.
Okay.
And we just lived through that in this pandemic. Or at least as far as it goes in the United States, it was an opportunity for a bunch of people to robber baron a bunch of public funds and vacuum a bunch of the money upwards.
Yeah.
which of course is part of like neoliberal philosophy, and therefore obviously the good. Otherwise, it couldn't have happened.
That's right.
If it wasn't the market's will, it wouldn't have happened. So in America, we probably could say, let's get together on Saturday if the market wills it.
Nice.
We can do that, right?
Yeah.
If the market wills it. All right, so that's that question. We're going to do the society thing a lot when we do the Taoist one, and maybe we'll do that big picture, and maybe we'll do the personal one again, and talk through it. So then they have this, like, is it Satan, the way they talk about
Shaitan, yeah.
Shaitan. Okay, so the way it works out, as you might kind of expect, is you have Shaitan, and Shaitan tempts Adam and Eve. That story again. And I guess he was originally so this is just backstory because I just found this kind of interesting. So the original name, I guess, was Iblis. Is that how you pronounce the angel that used to be Shaitan?
I don't know.
Anyways, that's what they said. It's like they went it as Iblis. Do you know how you would pronounce that in Arabic? All right, anyways. And they said he was an angel or a jinn. And I wanted to ask you about this jinn thing because I didn't think jinn are jinn sometimes good, sometimes bad?
Usually
negative, right?
Yes, usually negative.
So
usually negative.
Yeah. So maybe he's an angel who became a jinn or something. I wasn't sure, but they said he was an angel or sometimes a jinn. And I was like, yeah, I hadn't heard jinn being described positive, right? They're usually described pretty negative, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, that was the backstory to that. And so there's this sort of like typical biblical story with this, right? Going back to the Old Testament and Torah. And so then I guess in Muslim thought, everyone has sort of a natural instinct within them of right and wrong. And the terminology they use there is something called like fitra, but maybe you can correct my pronunciation on that too. Is that word familiar to you?
What's the word?
Fitrah.
I don't know. It doesn't sound familiar.
Some kind of like it might also mean instinct, I guess, but some kind of internal moral sense, right? Probably implanted by the divine. You have a certain internal moral sense.
Because like I
think you've referenced your inner Jiminy Cricket. Have you done that in episodes?
Yeah, I have. We've done a few episodes.
Yeah, you've talked about your inner Jiminy Cricket. So this is, I guess, your inner Jiminy Cricket.
Yeah, I know. Like in what they'll talk about like haram and hadith, and haram meaning like you've gone against God's will. It's like shame, that's bad.
Haram, I think English speakers sometimes know that word. I've heard
that and then to do something within God's will, following the rules, like having sex with your wife or husband, that's hadith. This is good. So you can you could work your way back into the good graces of the Lord by having intercourse with a married person
who's yours, apparently.
Hopefully.
Otherwise you're kind of like playing with the lines.
Yeah,
I have no objection to. It's up to you, but okay. Right. Yeah. So there's this internal instinct, and also kind of a free will is implied there. And we'll talk about how the Kabbalists, not the Kabbalists, how they talk about this in Judaism, and the Kabbalists would think the same way, I guess. So you have this inner sense of right and wrong and this free will, but then there's the shaitan, the evil jinn, trying to like lead you astray. Okay. So most religious, like big three religions, this sounds pretty similar, right? Life on earth, then, I guess, is seen as being short. So just this little respite. There are going to be trials. There are going to be sufferings. There are going to be tests. You can talk about why that would be in a little bit. But eventually this is leading to a more paradisical existence, a paradise type existence if you find your way through it. So pretty similar, right? And then I think the way Allah is talked about here, Allah on the one hand will lead you, right? But then also, and this is always the mystery in the big three, is also going to test you, right? And whether that is for educational purposes, right? As part of making you a better being, or whether that's as a fair retribution for acts that you've done that are kind of like not so good, right? Or whether that is a test to be handled with like patience and faith, like kind of like the book of Job or something like that, right? Like this is kind of like the kind of options here for how this would be talked about. Does that all make sense to you from Muslim's point of view?
Yeah.
That seems pretty accurate, right?
Mhm.
You still get the same question, which is like, okay, and this is the Buddhist objection to this line of thought, for what it's worth, right? They would just say, well, why would the divine being that had all power and all wisdom do that?
Right.
Like, why would it do that? And they
Right.
keep asking that question, and I guess that is the question. That's not to be, negative to anybody who's like, a Muslim or a Christian or following Judaism. It's just, it is the question that's always going to be hanging there. Like, why do
Right.
that?
Right.
Like, what's the point of that? And so I don't know. It's an interesting question. I mean, we'll talk about the free will thing, obviously.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say.
Yeah, that's going to come up with the Judaism thing a lot, obviously, but in all these faiths. So, okay. The also thing that they brought up too was that, and this goes with obviously, like, what would Jesus do? You can imitate the qualities of Allah, right? So when they're suffering, you're able to generate compassion, able to help others. I mean, that's kind of an explanation of sorts, I suppose, right? There's going to be suffering in the world, and part of what it does is it leads you to develop compassion and empathy and like the ability to assist others. And I think that's a big deal in the Kabbalah for sure, developing those resources inside yourself. I guess the question still remains.
Yeah, I mean,
why do it?
It's a good way of,
why not just give the people the qualities in the first place? But free will or some shit, I don't know.
but I think that helps with one's perspective, right? In a means to change the way that you're viewing why things would occur, right?
Yeah.
Right? Is it like, okay, well, I don't know why they're occurring, but what can I do in the midst of the occurrence if I'm not able to, like, I don't know, I guess to say, like, intervene in the way that would seem, logical for me to intervene within, then I would be able to kind of reflect back compassion, reflect back empathy, sympathy, these kinds of feelings, because they may not, I mean, yes, to your point, it could have just been imbued upon us and just flipped on with a switch, and that could have been it. But without, I've been looking for the switch. Hopefully it's going to be more easily accessible, but without that, I think it does help. But the only problem, well, not the only problem, one of many problems, is that that's not always a default sort of response, right? A lot of times the default response is actually anger.
Yeah.
And repulsion and retribution and revenge and things like this. And I think this might be the pull of shaitan, as they would say.
Yeah. That you have some like negative polarity pulling on you. Which is like, certainly in Islam, it's not like this is an even contest, though. The shaitan is like not as powerful as Allah by any measure.
No.
So Allah allows this force to exist from that way of thinking.
Yeah.
So you're always gonna have this funny question, So, okay. Yeah. But I think we both agree, and this is like the role that sometimes happens, like, and again, a culture like Tibet, where they go like, well, bad shit's happened, it's karma, let me take the positive attitude towards this. That's always good. So, I mean, I don't see any downside of any of that.
No.
At all. It just poses this weird set of other questions. But as far as like these are all things to do, you say, okay, I have this image of compassion, whether it's like the divine source of a creator of Allah or like a human version of that in a Jesus figure. Let me like think about how I would emulate those qualities. That seems healthy psychologically, right?
Yeah.
All right, so that's what I have on Islam, unless there's anything else you thought was important to say.
No.
The only thing I would probably do for myself is I want to look more into the Rumi Hafez collection. And I have Rumi's writings on Islam, not just his poetry. And they are interesting, but I can't say like I know them as well as maybe I could. So.
But I think the other part is that to highlight for folks who are not, familiar with some of these other Abrahamic traditions, is that they're very just like all of the other traditions. So you'll have traditionalists, right, who follow the rules by the blah, 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 blah. And then you'll have your more spiritual side, right? So these would be in Islam, these would be like your Sufi practitioners who, like the Buddhists, use tons and tons and tons and tons of mantra.
Different sources,
yeah, and practice together, and it's a different kind of a thing, So like in the you have your Orthodox people, then you have your Kabbalists. They're not
the same deal.
No, they're not thinking the same deal, and you do have some, I think it's a probably smaller number, but I do have Christian mystics, and
so maybe the whole thing, we did a series on Gnosticism, right? Those are Christian mystics.
The Gnostics and maybe even the Jesuits to some degree.
For sure. Meister Eckhart that we haven't done anything on. Sometimes
Yeah.
at point we'll do.
So you have that wing of the ideology. You have the faith that's sort of like, I don't know, for me it's kind of like the churning fire of the faith itself. You know, if the faith is a hot air balloon, you have the structure of the canopy and the basket, but it's the spiritual part, those people who practice and study those things. To me, that's the fire, that's the hot air.
Well, I think is one of our figures we really love, Bob Thurman. He always is making that point too. In any tradition, you're going to have your mystic branch, and they're going to be different.
Yeah.
They're going to be the outliers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the outcasts even.
Yeah. But from my perspective, that they keep the faith. That's the.
Yeah. There's something they keep burning, which is experiential and deep and internal that might not always be there in other people who are doing this in a different way, right? I think that's fair to say. That's certainly the Bobby T point.
I mean, I'm just sort of, thinking out loud at the moment, so I apologize if it's stupid, but I would be hard pressed. I'm just running through my mind at the moment. It would be hard. I'm hard pressed to think of a faith that doesn't have that has any sort of foothold.
Doesn't have that dichotomy in it, right?
Well, that doesn't have the sort of spiritual wing,
Yeah.
That doesn't have the
people
spiritual
who are
wing.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I don't, and I can't think. So, I mean, if our audience is listening, if you could bring up, if you have an example, feel free to, email us ginandtantra@gmail.com or hit us up on Instagram, but I'm having a hard time thinking that. And the reason why I say all of that is because to me, that is equally, if not more important than the structures, actually, Because,
go ahead. Sorry, I didn't cut you off.
Yeah, because that is kind of like the way in which things come from. That's like the beginning of the manifestation from the sort of infinite through becoming more finite. That's the very first place, is the sort of indescribable, the experiential. You're just sort of jumping in a pool, not knowing that it's water. Then we could describe its wetness and its chemical structure and everything else about it. But at one point you're like, it's cool and liquidy, like.
There's going to be like the mystical side of things and the mystical teachings around something, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to have these other branches that are just going to be, this other parts, ritual and cultural things and things like that. Now, I was thinking about this before we did this episode, where I was going, that is like a big deal in my life, where I feel like then people may disagree with this, but I feel like then those are kind of like almost like universally within the public domain. You have things that are just universal teachings that, are just human wisdom, that we all can get access to, that are different than what it means to be like, an Orthodox Jewish person. That's not the same deal, right? The perspectives of the people are going to be different, right? The person who's looking at the Kabbalistic teachings and they're, more of you're a Jewish person following other aspects of the Jewish tradition, not just that one not just that one mystical part, are going to think about that mystical part differently.
Right.
But those teachings might be like something we can all benefit and relate to. And that's kind of like a major theme of this podcast, but that's also a major theme of like my life. When I went to go do traditional Chinese medicine and all that, I was pretty clear, and I studied with Chinese teachers and I got Taoist initiations, but I was always kind of aware, this is always going to be different for me. Than it would be for someone who, would be a Chinese person and they grew up in that family and all that. My take on this is always going to be different, but it shows a lot of respect from my side because I think these are really profound things that I want to learn from,
Right.
Yeah. It's just one of those questions, but I feel like those things are kind of core sets of ideas, techniques, and experiences that are kind of like the kind of the root of things that we're talking about it. And that's what we're trying to tap back into.
Yeah.
All right. So the Judaisms, unless, the other thing I was just thinking, maybe I would ask you, did you or your mom feel like there's parts of, Islam that are just, completely misrepresented and badly handled in the culture? Does your mom ever feel that way where she gets kind of upset about it?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no doubt about that. I mean, scapegoating, and obviously there's been, as in any culture, there's bad actors for sure. And there has been, it's not a part of the sort of PC movement has been to kind of clean that up a little bit so that it's not whatever.
especially in the aughts. I think going there was this sort of thing of trying to like hostility and all that.
Yeah, I'm
Post
not.
9/11, but also like let's clean this up and not be
Yeah, let's clean
nasty
it up.
about
And so
this.
that, that's a, from that perspective, there's been a positive around it. There's not as much, but not we, because I don't care, but like the society shifts its ire towards different groups, as time goes on based on who's the current baddie. But this is the othering that this culture does, right? And it happens on all spectrums, the othering of the madness of the crazy ones, of the dark ones, of the religious zealots, of the poor ones, of the rich ones. Like it's always pitting you against someone else to show discrepancy in how we're together with you, and it's a straw man argument. It's dichotomous, it's dualistic, it's simplistic.
It's perfectly purposely divisive to alienate people from one another in terms of political power and things like that.
Correct. And look, if you're born in a culture, you don't know anything else. That's what you know, whether it's Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Catholic, whatever. If you're born into it and you're not an outside the box kind of thinker, you follow the rules and you follow momentum and what your parents have done, you're not going to question these things. You're going to live within that culture, find somebody who believes what you believe, marry them, indoctrinate your kids. And indoctrination has a negative connotation, generally speaking. I'm just saying you're going to continue, with what was done for you. I'm not going to fault all of those people for following along. I'm certainly not any better because I decided to go against that. Perspective is different, and once you have some shift in your understanding on things, you can never shift back. You cannot unknow. Yeah.
Like once the cat is out of the box, the cat's out of the box.
The cat's out of the box. Sorry, Schrodinger.
Yeah, I was going there. I guess the only thing you could say, if you want to make a value judgment, what you could say is you could be Socratic about it and say, like, if you're not really to ask the questions about your life, then that's not as good. I mean, obviously, we're taking that value in this podcast. If you want to make it like Socrates, we can be all Greek about it and say, the unexamined life is not worth living or something like that. Yeah. On the shower curtain of wisdom, I have one from the psychologist, Irvin Yalom, where he's just like, when people don't show any interest in self-awareness, that's always a bad sign. Something like that, So, okay, that's the attitude we're taking. We're making some value judgment, though we try to be fair. Yeah, that's the value judgment. So, you can kind of make it like, it's not to be judgy, but it is something you can say, like, well, if you're not going to question, well, what's the point of this?
I agree.
Then you will just kind of like just Kool-Aid drink, which can be dangerous, right? Yeah. Okay, so do you think it was a fair version of the way we talked about Islam? Does that seem fair to your understanding of it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, I'm not. I know you're not I mean, I studied I took a graduate level course on history of the caliphate, which was a very interesting class. Yeah. The development of the Islamic State, not ISIS or ISIL as it is today, but the actual caliphate,
Yeah.
But that wasn't necessarily like religious in its studies, I took it at secular.
But like your mom identifies as Muslim for sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
for sure. So you've been exposed to it. So you got.
Oh yeah. Sense, yeah. Right? I mean, I've been to mosque, I don't know, 30, 40 times in my lifetime. And, so yeah. And I love the way that it sounds, the prayers they sound. Sufis practice what is called zikr. It's translated as remembrance. And so you repeat the 99 names of God 99 times to help you to remember. And you're remembering, and she talked about this on her episode, which if you guys haven't heard it, it's good. I know
it's really good. We got a lot of positive feedback on that episode too.
Yeah.
It's a very moving story, very touching, very sincere, very authentic.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
right?
It's authentic.
Very all that stuff. From her.
But the Sufis practice zikr, and it's a practice of remembrance, and it's remembering your union with God, with the Creator. And having done it, it's a wonderful thing. Really, really is. It's a non-violent.
Yeah, I mean, again, like in different ways, I've done the same thing where you you meditate on the names of the divine and stuff. I've done those meditations. They're powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, something like, we've been doing meditations periodically here. We probably could do more, but just like doing those meditations, there's something that happens. It's a very powerful experience.
without a doubt.
Yeah, it's not a joke. It's for reals.
And so it's beautiful. And this, this doesn't get shared,
That's true. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's part of the gripe of the show. If you could extract the experiential wisdom technology aspects, you could say.
No, technology.
Bobby T sometimes use that word.
No, for
technologies. Sure. Out of these things, there's just so much we could learn from all of these things. I mean, obviously, that's like one of the underlying themes of this whole thing, right? Trying to
but if you really
intellectual meditative technology,
that's correct. And because if you talk to, and we have, you talk to Buddhist or tantric or Vedic or Hindu yogic people, they will regularly say that human beings are the most advanced machine on the planet by far, and that we have untapped technology. It is the software is untapped. Human potential is full human potential is truly untapped. And they have sort of, I don't want to belittle the practices, but software hacks, and try and develop the software in such a way that you can transcend beyond the normal, transcend beyond the average worker, whether you're talking about chakras or nadis or acupuncture channels or the energy systems, nervous system. I mean, these are just theories, but what we're talking about is software.
Sometimes in Taoism, they'll talk about like the brain, and like you get the vibe that the metaphor is that's like a whole universe in there.
Mm-hmm.
You have like all of these neurons, which are like as numerous as the stars spread out in a galaxy, right? And they're all sitting there, and it's like you have your own universe inside you, and it hasn't been fully explored.
Correct.
It hasn't been fully explored what the power in these things are. Yeah. All right, so that's what we're trying to do. It's like a little ambitious, but that's what we're trying to do. Okay. But like, what else you got going on in your life? Might as well do this.
Might as well.
It's a good time.
What'd you say? The unexamined life is not one worth living.
It's not one worth living. Yeah. But it's a good time. Some of the best times you're going to have,
Oh, I think
you can even do it when you're having sex.
You can, explore the cosmos.
You can get your brain to go, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, the whole cosmos is opened up.
Double orgasm.
This orgasm. There it is. Yeah. So I mean, what better time are you going to have? Really, honestly, you could sit and like binge watch Netflix, or you could let your brain orgasmically explode and like see visions of the universe. I mean, which way do you want to roll? Come on, seriously. All right. In any case, talking about Judaism. Yeah, perfect G&T transition. Unless you got something else you want to say about that, Daniel, or you want to cut that thing?
I mean, there's we can go on. I mean, that's the Eastern tradition. All of them are.
That's the part that makes me like, and like Western too, the Kabbalists, the Sufis, shit like that, right?
Yeah.
Shamanism, right? It's all over the world. It's all over the world.
It's all over the world. People want to know what's going on inside.
Yeah. Well, maybe. But that's it. Yeah, if you can figure out what's going on. All over the world, there are people who want to do this. Yeah. All in the world, there are people who want to do this. And I think maybe the gist here, which is what the Jin and Tantra metaphor is. If you get a taste, take a sip.
Take a sip.
You might like it.
Drink the spirits.
You might like how it feels.
That's right.
Sip. Yeah. All right. So, well, we know where we're coming from. So, all right. So the Judaism thing, what's the suffering there? And guess what? We're back to this garden again. Where some people listen to a snake that they shouldn't have. Okay, but the thing they're trying to make it in Judaism, which is kind of like interesting, and I don't know if they always do this, it's kind of interesting, but you can get this conversation about like this is now an internalized force or something. So the shaitan or the Satan is not necessarily something external, it's also like an internalized thing. I mean, sometimes it's talked about it's external, but sometimes it's also like being acknowledged that it's internal. And as I was again doing my little research around this, because I want to do honest presentations, they did put more of an emphasis here on the internal Satan. That's what you're kind of dealing with, because this got internalized. And there might even be like a theology that it happened when the apple was originally crunched or something. Something happened that got internalized. So you can make of that what you want, but it's saying something. Right. So you're kind of resisting something inside yourself, which is what you were talking about with your own emotions and the negative aspects of your own responses. That all seems like could be good.
And almost all the traditions, they talk about overcoming unconscious forces,
Yeah, for sure.
all of them, really.
Yeah.
Developing willpower as a means to transcendence, actually.
Well, you need some kind of willpower. Yeah, you do need, which is how you learn how to exercise free will, which is the next point on this thing, on this outline, but it's free will. But you need to have willpower in order to exercise your free will. Otherwise, maybe you just get, like you were saying, carried along.
Yeah.
By whatever the momentum is of the situation, or the momentum of your own emotions and your own thoughts on the things are, your own internal world will just carry you with a certain momentum.
Yeah, and in chemistry, they have what's called like energy of activation, which is the first step of a chemical reaction, right? And so what's the amount of energy that has to be produced, has to be present in order for this reaction to occur, right? And I think that the building up of one's willpower is sort of like a development of that, your own strength, in order to make that energy of activation occur, and then if you get help from the outside world, then maybe that energy of activation, that barrier, right, lowers even a little bit more, so that you can kind of find your way through. But unfortunately, as you and I both know, life is difficult, and you have to constantly build this will thing. Like, it's a constant, from a Chinese medical perspective, this is the kind of the water element, the kidneys, the yang, your own sort of essence that you have to consistently develop. And it may be strong for a certain time, but then based on life or whatever, it'll wear out. It'll wear you out, and then you don't have it, and it can go away. So these things, I talk about this in the shamanic course that I teach. Like, if you lose some ability in your lifetime, like if you were a very heavy dreamer, and then all of a sudden your dreams just stopped, you will feel like a different person. You're not, something feels, it's like you're missing a part of yourself, and you have to kind of go back. And maybe certainly I'd like to hear if you had this experience, but I've treated a number of patients over the years. And that's one of the things that when they get their dreams back, there's just a huge smile on their face. It's like they've been given another life almost,
or like, when people are able to see their dreams with a clarity that they weren't able to see them before, and they can feel the inspiration. I guess in Chinese medicine, you say that that's like the Hun acting, right? It's an aspect of the psyche, or even you could say the spirit of the person, the soul of the person, that like is, it's like, it's associated sometimes with dreaming, especially dreams that have meanings to them in the Chinese medical world and the Taoist world, right? Where the dreams are meaningful, and you not just like, there's rando dreams that you're like, well, that didn't seem like that was that great. But there are dreams where you're like, well, that seems like something's being said there. That's like the Hun speaking.
Yeah. Which is, No, I just say after the watermelon is the water element, is the wood element, so it's
that's right. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So building up.
So this Han thing is associated with the liver, but the liver is associated with the wood element in Chinese medical thought.
Yeah.
And it's also associated with the eyes. So you can kind of see things. You can kind of see things in your dream, and you can see things more clearly in your life. It's like a metaphor of like, you see in the world around you through your eyes, but you can kind of look and see in your life overall, see the vision of where you want your life to go. Vision. Like through the power of this aspect of your internal being, this Hun thing, this aspect of your spirit,
and the fortitude to act upon these visions is your manifest
is the will,
right? And that's your backside, that's the spine, that's what all the yogis and the Buddhist stuff, that's what they talk about, is the activation of that, the channels along the spine to kind of like wake you up.
This is like, if we go back like some episodes before, we were talking about Hakuin's meditation of like building up yang.
Yes.
Right. That's healing the body, but also builds will. So then when you get that will, you're able to exert that within your life. Right. Giving credit to friend of the show and my personal friend, Justin Key. He likes this metaphor. He's been using it, and it's a good one. It's similar to your energy of activation. He would talk about like potential wells. People can find themselves in the potential well. You're just stuck in this well, if you imagine, and you just can't get out of it. I'm kind of holding up my hands to the camera here, trying to illustrate it if you're just listening to the thing, but you're stuck in this well, and you need a certain energy of activation to get you out of this well.
Yeah, like a literal well.
Yeah, like a well,
Yeah.
like stuck in a pit or something.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, like you're stuck in a pit, and people can get like stuck in a pit in their lives and they're just
Mm-hmm.
stuck there, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
takes a lot of energy to burst out of that pit. But what they try to do in certainly Zen, Taoism, they do it in Buddhist Tantra and other traditions in their own way too, right? But you're trying to build up this energy of activation.
Mm-hmm.
In Chinese medicine, you'd say your internal yang, which what you're saying, Daniel, feeds your will, right?
Mm-hmm.
Feeds this will that allows you to kind of burst out with the energy of activation you're talking about out of this potential well,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, Justin's metaphor, right? You know, you kind of gives you the shot to break out of that thing. But if you don't have the energy to do it, you're stuck in the well, right? Yeah, that's it. So the Hakone meditation, if people are interested, if you haven't heard it, you can go back and kind of just, you know, great Zen master, and he has a way of trying to do this with some visualizations and things like that. But you're trying to build up a certain kind of will, and that's what will push you through. And he says that's what will help you like understand a lot of the complexities and the Zen riddles and mysteries of life, because you have the will to confront them, and you have the will to kind of drive through to look for your solutions.
And the will is what is going to keep you following along with, you know, God's quote unquote will, in terms of all the laws and the rules in Judaism, in Islam. Those two in particular have more of the rules, in Catholicism as well, you know.
Yeah.
But that's the will that keeps you on this, you know, straight and narrow, if you will want to use that analogy.
Or the crooked and interesting.
Yeah, well, depending on which side of the equation you're on, right?
Which way you want to go. Maybe you want to walk the crooked and interesting. Totally fine. But you still need some will.
You still need will.
Either way, you're going to need some will, right? To do the crooked and interesting.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think? Like, do we have time to talk about some of the Judaism thing? You want to do it, or you want to like?
Yeah, I got about 10 minutes, so let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. Okay, so all right, yeah, we started in it. So you're going to need free will, right?
That's
what you were talking about. Yeah. Yep. And so from a big picture perspective, then in, you know, Jewish thought, you can get this idea that you have like the other side. So the divine has to like have what it wants you to do, what you were talking about, the will of Allah, or like the rules that you should follow, or whatever, right? However you want to think about that. But you also need other options. So that necessitates the idea that there's going to have to be like choices that aren't good, or choices that are outside the will of the divine. So you have the free will to choose, otherwise you wouldn't have any free will. If the only options you could choose was the will of Allah, then you don't really have any free will. But they kind of make the point in Jewish thought, which you don't hear this a lot in Catholicism. They don't make this point this way. This is different to my ears, right? I don't know if you feel this way, but there has to be other options there that are like suboptimal and not the will of Allah. Otherwise you really wouldn't have free will. So they make this point, right? And so therefore there's a choice to like violate the commandments, or like disobey the divine, which can lead to suffering, which you'll get feedback on because you suffer, and you're supposed to recognize this and learn. But there has to be this option over there to do this. And like, it's interesting. You don't hear that too much. Even in the Kabbalah, they say there's almost like the tree of life, but there's also another tree that you could follow that like is just different, you know, that will, you know, lead you somewhat away, but the option has to be there. Otherwise to say you have free will is like not real, because there wouldn't be any other choices. Like, that's interesting. You know, when I heard that for the first time, you know, coming from my like more Catholic background, I was like, I can't remember anyone ever saying that to me, you know? And so it's, you know, it's a way of thinking about, you know, if you do have a divine force that is, you know, omniscient, omnipotent, all powerful, and benevolent, this is like an explanation as to why this would be the way it is, to open up that space for people to have free will. I mean, what do you think about that? Have you heard anything like that? I didn't hear anything like that in the Catholicism I study. It's always like, well, you don't want to go that way because it's bad. Okay, right. But like, there's this idea, like, you know, these choices have to be there. Otherwise, free will would be a folly. Right. You know, it wouldn't be like a real thing. And then you get the feedback loop as a living being now with free will, that you get to explore your world and then just get your feedback like, well, that turned out shitty, so I probably shouldn't do that. Right. So you're supposed to learn. Well, that's interesting. That's a little bit different, right? And so you get the idea, like, okay, you might be in situations where it's a punishment because you did something, like you got a little zapped, right? Or it's a test or a thing to develop empathy. Like, the same ideas are there, but it's in this different kind of way of framing it, right? And with the idea, I guess you get this in all the big three, but it can bring you closer to the divine source too, because, you know, you suffer and you turn to the divine. So that's talked about, right?
Right.
Or you see suffering in others, and you want to help, and you can kind of like emulate the divine. So it sort of has this, it's a different way of thinking about like the functionality behind it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So even though it may be a mystery and not always clear, you can still operate in any of these traditions within the framework of like, I'm trying to develop compassion. I'm trying to like learn how I should do things differently. I'm trying to develop like, perseverance, will. I'm trying to develop
Right.
trust and faith that there's going to be a meaning for these things. Those all seem kind of positive, right?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things I promised last time was we were going to have like story time.
Yeah.
Joseph Campbell story time.
Maybe this would be a good place to end.
So this is the story. You want to do it here, or you want me to save it for next
No,
time?
no, no. Do it now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the story of Rabbi Eliezer, right? And I'll tell the tale, and then we'll get your reaction, Daniel. Okay, so what we talked about last episode is that you do get this part of like Jewish tradition where they'll debate with the divine, which is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and Bobby T had talked about it in our episode. Robert Thurman had talked about it in our episode together too, that he loved this part of Judaism because they argue, and he likes to argue, clearly. So he likes to argue and debate. So here's the tale. And if I pronounce things wrong, I pronounce them wrong. Okay, it's the rabbis, and they're having this debate over whether or not a certain kind of oven is proper ritual within like the ritual purity things around food. So debating this point, which obviously is quite abstract. So they have like an oven that consists of tiles that are separated from one another by sand, but externally plastered over by cement. Is this still like kosher? Is the debate. Which already strikes me as amusing somehow. I don't know. It's so like abstract. But they're debating this out. And the rabbis debate. And Rabbi Eliezer argues that the oven is ritually pure and it's fine. And the other rabbis, especially this one particular rabbi, Gamaliel, I guess, Gamaliel, if I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right, but they argue that the oven is impure. So I'd heard this story, you know, and I was like, I didn't know the name of the rabbis involved. Actually, I thought Rabbi Akiva was involved in this, and he comes up later on in the story. Anyways, Rabbi Eliezer is pretty adamant about this, that this oven is fine. So he says, if my opinion is correct, then the carob tree will prove it. And then the carob tree like leaps from the ground and like moves away. And the other rabbis argue that carob tree has nothing to do with this law. It's just a carob tree. And so it offers no proof in our debate over the law. And so Rabbi Eliezer gets more upset. And he says, if my opinion is accord, the stream will prove it. And the stream begins to flow backwards. But again, the rabbis point out that stream like has no opinion about this law. And even this stream doing this weird thing doesn't have anything to do with this law. So the Rabbi Eliezer says, well, if this, my opinion is correct, then the walls of the study hall will prove it. And the walls begin to fall in. But then they're scolded by one of the rabbis who reminds the walls that they're interfering with debate. So the walls freeze. But they freeze in the in-between position, the way the story goes. They're showing respect to both the rabbis because they did start falling in, right? To acknowledge like, oh, Rabbi Eliezer's right. But they don't go all the way back. You know, they stop. So they're kind of, the walls are like showing respect for both people in the debate. So this Rabbi Eliezer is really frustrated at this point in the story. So he says, if my opinion is right, heaven will prove it. And a voice like comes down from heaven saying, why are you differing from Rabbi Eliezer? His opinion is correct. And in every place that he expresses opinions, he's always right. Why are you debating him? And the rabbi Joshua responds, the Torah is not in heaven. The Torah is on earth. And it's up to us to debate. You gave us this thing. We're here to interpret it, and we're interpreting it, and it's none of your business. Kind of a response. So, that's what it is. Then they're arguing and debating, and they basically, the way they win the debate is to go to the divine, to God. You gave us the Torah. It's up to us to analyze it. We've analyzed it. So the tree and the walls and the stream, and you have nothing to do with this. It's up to us to analyze this thing. And I think that summarizes the response here, right? I think even the Torah speaks and says, like, if I'm not in heaven, so, that's how it is. And then there's a kind of an after story where they excommunicate Rabbi Eliezer in the after story for disagreeing. And there's a really famous rabbi named Rabbi Akiva. He's kind of one of the ones I really appreciate as a figure in Jewish thought and connected to Kabbalah, because he's the one who, the way the tradition goes, got the Song of Songs put into the Bible, into the tradition. Like, he got the Song of Songs in there, and it's that very kind of erotic stuff, like he gets that Kabbalistic erotic part in there. And so it's Rabbi Akiva who goes to Rabbi Eliezer and said, well, they gave you the boot. Sorry, you're kicked out.
Mm-hmm.
And Rabbi Eliezer gets really upset, and he begins to cry. And the tradition says something like, he had the power to destroy the whole world. Yet, due to the respectful manner in which he was ostracized, only the third of the world's crops were destroyed.
Oh, nice. Good.
And the story ends when he's given this news, and the main rabbi who had him expelled gets retribution. He's out in the boat, and he's stuck in a storm. Kind of like a Jonah and the whale thing, if you know that story, right? So he's out in the storm, and this rabbi is being tossed around. And he says, Master of the universe, it is revealed and known before you that neither was it for my honor that I acted when ostracizing him, nor was it for the honor of the house of my father that I acted. Rather, it was for your honor, so disputes will not proliferate in Israel. And then with these words, the storm is calmed. So the point, I guess, they're making in the end is something like, we have to, as human beings, be able to resolve our disputes for ourselves, right? Using our own human reason and our own human understanding. And then ultimately the story continues on, and it becomes kind of like a teaching story. On the one hand, the one side's partially right in the way the story is thought of, because they have to go through and decide in a human way how to interpret the laws that were given to them, like the teachings that were given to them. Like, they have to be able to do that. On the other hand, it's also considered to be a story where they act too harsh to Rabbi Eliezer by kicking him out in the end. So it's a teaching story on both sides. This is the story of the oven of Achnai. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Eventually Rabbi Eliezer's wife sort of has the last word in it, because she says, the tradition that I received from the house of my father and his father are, all the gates of heaven are apt to be locked except for the gates of prayer for victims of verbal mistreatment. So in the end, if you're verbally mistreated, and the story goes, oh no, it's actually the wife of the rabbi. Oh no, it's actually the wife of Rabbi Eliezer talks about this, Anyways, that's the end of the story. That's my Joseph Campbell moment scene. But, it's an interesting story, and it's one of the ones where they debate, and they basically kind of argue, well, no, we're going to decide this within our human realm. But I was thinking about you and telling it, though, what's interesting about it is all the signs and indications tell everybody that Rabbi Eliezer is right. So that means something for our show too. In that, like, you would think that you would accept the carob tree walking around and the stream and the walls coming in and the voice from heaven. So I know it's an interesting story for our show.
Yeah.
I know what I think it means. Maybe we'll like contemplate for a week and come back next week and think about it. Yeah. But I was thinking about Daniel, you, Daniel, not biblical Daniel, you. I was like, oh, Daniel's going to have a weird response to this story. Because on the one hand, they argue with the divine, which is interesting. But on the other hand, they ignore all the signs and all the whatever, which is going to be like, I thought Daniel's response to this is going to be kind of curious.
Seems typical.
Seems typical human beings.
Yeah, that's right.
Just to ignore all the dictates of the divine screaming at you.
Yes. Completely typical.
But they also have their weird points in that they're going like, well, listen, if you're going to give us independence and free will and the law to interpret, let us do it. Right. Don't go like interfering. Which is, I know, I didn't learn that in Catholicism either.
No, not a standard point.
Not a standard point. All right. Well, we had our Joseph Campbell moment.
We did.
Mhm.
We
For
did.
next week, we got on the docket suffering in biological materialism and secular humanism. And then probably we'll talk about Taoism, and I'll crap on society for a while. Again, which I love to do. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah,
so
why
thanks,
not?
Daniel.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks, Daniel, thanks in advance for giving me the opportunity to do this next week.
That's all that's what I'm here for.
and tolerating that part of my personality. But I resisted it for several episodes.
Congratulations, Eric. I'll send you a small trophy in the mail.
Means I'm not addicted to it.
That's right. Well, as always, Eric, thank you for continuing on our journey together. Thank you, the audience, for listening, for watching, for sharing. If you have some questions, comments, concerns, desires for the show, things you'd like maybe us to cover, whatnot, please feel free to email us at ginandtantra, all spelled out, ginandtantra@gmail.com. You can hit us up on Instagram at Gin and Tantra, or watch some of the YouTubes on Gin and Tantra podcast on YouTube. Always happy to do it.
Yeah.
Always happy.
Enjoyable as always. Thank you, Dan.
Absolutely. For Eric, this is Daniel.
Thank you everyone too.
Yeah. Thanks so much. For Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.